If you've been following along with the HTML unit, you'll have these files here, and we've been using Sublime Text for the course. If you don't have these files, check underneath this video. Hopefully I put a link to them so you can pick up with us right here. Okay, so CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and we'll talk about what that means later in the course. But what it is it's the language that we use to apply visual effects to the elements in our web pages. So CSS allows us to style things and add colors and borders and all sorts of visuals to our web pages. So let's go ahead and create a new file here. You can see I've got the CSS folder here. There is one file in it I put that in there with your starter files. But for now, for this unit, the CSS unit, we're going to put all of our sample code in this CSS folder. So go ahead and right click on the CSS folder and choose new file, and let's save it right away. So press Control S to save it, and that'll allow us to give it a name. And let's just save it as Intro to CSS, and it should be a .html file. So this is going to be a web page just like the web pages we've been creating throughout the rest of this course here. Okay, so I'm going to press the save button here, and here we go. Now Sublime Text knows that we're working with an HTML file because we've saved it with the HTML extension, and that means we can use our little snippet tricks. So go ahead and right on line 1 type in HTML like that and hit tab, and Sublime Text will insert the basic elements for us. I always like to indent the head and the body. I think that's a good practice for beginners, so you can clearly see the structure here, and we can clearly see that the head element and the body element are children of the HTML element. So all this stuff is stuff we've talked about in the HTML unit here. Let's go ahead and add a title. So inside the title element, we'll make it say Intro to CSS. And then I suppose we'll go ahead and add an H1 element too, like we normally do, and that'll appear on the page as a big bold text, and it can just say Intro to CSS as well. Just like that. Okay, now we're ready to get started. There are a number of ways that you can incorporate CSS code into a web page, and I'll show you them in the next lesson, I believe it is. But for now, we're just going to use a simple one, which is to put a style element inside the head element. So I'm going to put my cursor right here after the title element and hit return. So I'm inside the head element. Now remember, the head element is for metadata, and that's information that you don't necessarily see on the page, but it has an effect on the page. So what we're adding here is code that will definitely affect the page, but so CSS, you can think of it as metadata, and that's why we put it in the head here. So I'm going to create a style element just like this, and I'll hit tab, and you can see that Sublime Text put in an attribute here, the type attribute, and set to text/CSS. That's no longer required anymore, so I'm just going to delete that. You can leave it if you want, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to split apart the opening and closing style tags like that, and here is where all of our CSS code is going to go. So here's where we're going to get started. So what I want you to type in here is H1 and then a pair of curly braces, and then go ahead and split apart the curly braces. So we've got a lot to talk about. There's some syntax going on that we need to discuss here, and we'll get to that in just a minute, but just go ahead and copy what I type in here. So inside the curly braces, I'm going to type in color and then colon, and then I'll put red right there. I can put a space here, I don't have to, and then Sublime Text probably put in a semicolon for you here. So what we're doing here is this chunk of CSS code is saying that all H1 elements should be colored red, and that's the text color that refers to. So if I go ahead and save my changes here, I'm going to do Control S to save my changes, and then I'm going to open this page up in the browser. So I'll right click here on the background and choose Open in Browser just like that, and here I'll drag this over here so you can see it, and there we go. Whoops, I'm fumbling. There we go. So you can see that our H1 element is colored in red text right now. Okay, so let's talk about the syntax here. So with CSS, what we have is a selector, and that's right here, the part that says H1. The selector indicates which elements you're targeting. And then in between the curly braces, we have what are called the rules. So a rule is made up of a property. The property is color, and the value is red. So these rules are made up of property names and the values that you set them to. So let's go ahead and add another rule here. So let's set the font dash family to Verdana. So I'm setting the font type to Verdana here, and if I save that, so Control S, Alt tab back over to the browser and hit refresh. Now you can see that the font has changed to Verdana. Okay, let's go back to the code here. Now this whole chunk of code right here is known as a rule set. And a rule set is made up of a selector, which I mentioned. So remember, the selector indicates which elements you're targeting. In this case, our selector is saying we're targeting H1 elements. And then inside the curly braces, we have our rules. So your rules are made up of property names and what their values are set to. So we've got the color property set to red. The font family is set to Verdana. Now notice that after the property name comes a colon, and after the value there comes a semicolon. So you'll have to wrestle with the syntax a little bit, but you'll get used to it. And Sublime Text will help you out. It'll insert that semicolon there for you. Now I could reformat this. If I don't have a whole lot of rules inside my rule set, I could put everything on one line like this. So you'll see this quite a bit too. So I'm just going to put everything, the entire rule set, all on one line. So you'll see that. But if you have a lot of rules inside your curly braces, then it makes more sense to break it up into separate lines like what I had before. Let's go ahead and add another rule set here. So this time we're going to target H2 elements. So my selector is going to be H2. Remember, that's the part that comes before the curly braces, the selector. And then I'm going to go ahead and split apart the curly braces right here, and I'm going to say H2s are going to be blue, so I'll set the color property to blue here, and notice the syntax, the colon and the semicolon, where they go, and then I'll set the font family here to Helvetica, I guess, just like that. And now I don't have any H2 elements on my page, so we wouldn't see this. Let's go ahead and add an H2 element right down here. So this is an H2. So I'll go ahead and save my changes and Alt tab over to the browser and hit refresh here. And there you go, you can see my blue H2 element right there.